Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update. First part thereof for the 8th of March 2025. As ever, I'm remaining in solidarity with my Canadian brothers and sisters with some more Canadian apparel. This is a Rugby Sevens top. Some retro apparel sent to me by Michael Vuchar. Thank you, Michael. Legend. Right, we're going to go to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description to the video below. Some interesting stats here. First of all, we've got the lowest personnel losses for a very long time. 1,000 on the nose there. So 1,000 is still a lot of people to lose in a day, but it's interesting that that is obviously as low as you can get in the stats over or equal to 1,000. I think that shows that things have quietened down in many places along the front line as far as Russian attacks are concerned. There's a lot of activity happening in Kursk. We're going to talk about Kursk. It's a bit of a nightmare for the Ukrainians. It looks like they might well be pulling out of Kursk, and it might be connected to intelligence sharing issues. They seem to have been, and also that the Russians going for it big time. Guided glide bombs plus huge amounts of troops to flush out the Ukrainians so that they can have Kursk off the map in terms of negotiations. But at the same time, they're less concerned about places like Toretsk. Indeed, Chasiv Yar, Toretsk, Kupiansk, Pokrovsk, the Ukrainians are pushing back. So we see 4 tanks lost here, below the daily average, 12 troop-carrying AFVs, likewise 24 artillery systems above the daily average, still some good stats there. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems. That's a good stat. Love to see some of the loss lists if they're ever going to come out from Andrew. 113 vehicles and fuel tanks is a pretty high number with 3 pieces of special equipment. We have 148 drones and 35 cruise missiles. They have ramped up the Russians, their aerial attacks, particularly in terms of missiles. And last night was no exception. There was some pretty horrific strikes going on, including some double tap strikes on affecting emergency services, as far as I understand it. So it's a mixed bag of nuts there, really, for the Ukrainians, but still hammering away at the artillery systems and some anti-aircraft systems also being taken out. Now let's have a look at this. This is Russians are bogged down and suffering serious losses in Chasiv Yar, says War Translated, due to Ukraine's significant drone advantage. Something I talked about a lot recently. There were claims that they did have a 6-to-1 drone advantage, and it's now even higher. Essentially, they can't even lift their heads. The use of armoured vehicles is extremely limited. Electronic warfare is ineffective due to the rapid adaptation of the Ukrainian armed forces. Chasiv Yar, says a Russian source here. The week passed without any significant changes. The main reason for the lack of success remains the enemy's air dominance. The reconnaissance drones are in the sky 24/7, and any movement on our part is immediately met with a massive wave of FPV drones. These drones reach much further and strike much more frequently than we can afford. As a result, infantry simply doesn't reach the objectives. In the best case, it's a 300 wounded, with subsequent evacuation with all the associated risks. In the worst case, we just lose people without achieving anything. The same applies to armoured vehicles. They essentially operate in a one-way manner, serving only to quickly close the distance when any other approach would be even riskier. Beyond infantry, logistics is also suffering. Lately, the enemy has been actively hunting our drone teams. We are forced to move closer to the front line. To answer the inevitable question, why aren't we getting electronic warfare support? We are, but the enemy adapts extremely quickly, changing frequencies, while our electronic warfare systems, at best, cover less than half of the frequencies they use. The only solution is to purchase additional modules ourselves and install them to cover the entire range of frequencies the enemy operates on. So that's very good news, and that's pertaining to Chasiv Yar. Good news for the Ukrainians. And indeed, we're also starting to see some footage coming out from Chasiv Yar. It seems like Russians threw all of their leftover equipment when they gathered for the final push on Chasiv Yar. Over 20 units, says War Translated again. The assault was repelled with 16 vehicles either destroyed or damaged. When you go back to these figures and you're thinking 16 units, well, most of them are going to be from Chasiv Yar, although that could have been from the day before, but you get my point. No report says in the Chasiv Yar direction, I presume talking about the same incident, Russian forces attempted to storm the northern district. Roughly 25 vehicles were engaged, 16 were destroyed. Infantry scattered while clearing operations are now underway. Mass destruction of Russian equipment. And actually, interesting here that you can see these APCs and tanks being turned into real Mad Max vehicles and used quite widely. But anyway, so videos and imagery coming out of Russian repelled attacks having a real bloody nose in the Chasiv Yar direction. So it might not be that the Ukrainians are taking huge amounts of territory back in some of these places, but they are just really hammering the Russians when they try to attack. Even throwing in what is probably, there was some saying, this is the last of the equipment, the mechanized equipment they could pull together in this area and threw them at the Ukrainians. Now, I don't know whether that's at all true, but the idea is that they're desperately throwing everything and the kitchen sink at the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians, with that air dominance, that FPV drone dominance, are able to halt these attacks. And like I said, over the last couple of days, the Ukrainians appear to be trying to substitute infantry's, soldiers, human beings, with these drones, and it has an effect. They have halted the Russians attacking here. It's only when the Russians can massively overwhelm the Ukrainians, maybe up in Kursk, that they are in trouble. And there's talk up there that that's also linked to a lack of intelligence sharing. So there are some claims that the Kursk problem is at least somewhat a result of the Americans stopping their intelligence sharing, and therefore the Americans have blood on their hands. We'll come to that later to look at a few claims. Ukrainian FPV drones taking off from marine drones and attacking armored vehicles and anti-aircraft warfare systems of the Russian armed forces in Kherson region. We've heard about this before. We've seen this before. This is now further evidence that the Ukrainians have adapted their USVs, unmanned surface vehicles or sea vehicles, to use them as these, what you can see here, as these kind of aircraft carriers, if you like. They pilot these boats to Kherson, maybe the southern coast of Kherson, Skadovsk kind of area, the Tendriska Spit, or even as far as Crimea. And then the FPV drones take off, probably using the USVs as a repeater, and then go and strike at air defense systems within the range of, I suppose if you're parking those USVs close to the coast, then you've got 20 kilometers from the coast to play with, and that's really useful. That's a great adaptation for the Ukrainians there. Indeed, here, Euromaidan Press says 2 Russian SAM systems were struck by Ukrainian FPV drones launched from an uncrewed boat. FPV drones launched from the Black Sea struck a Russian OSA, AKM, and Estrela 10. So these are shortish range air defense systems in the occupied part of Kherson Oblast or Crimea. So actually, they're not sure whether it's Kherson or Crimea. Now, Andrew Perpetua casts his opinion. Actually, no, I'm going to leave that to back here because we've got a whole section on Kursk there. So we'll now go to the claim that Ukraine has destroyed 2 diesel trains in Russia, according to military intelligence. 2 diesel trains were disabled in Russia as a result of Ukraine's military intelligence operations. And I don't know if this is the same as this footage coming out. So Defense Intelligence of Ukraine sabotaged a locomotive in a Russian army logistics area. Overnight on March the 6th, a successful operation was carried out on the railway in Voronezh in Russia. The locomotive supplied munitions and equipment from Russian factories to the occupied territories of Ukraine. So here we have someone setting fire to a logistics train and then doing a runner. A few weeks ago before this, on February the 19th, Ukrainian intelligence also set fire to a cargo train in the Moscow region. So this is something that is becoming, hopefully, easier for Ukraine to do, or more frequent. And I have long said that fire is the cheap and best option for causing widespread destruction. Even if you're talking about, say, being a terrorist, and not that I'm advocating this, but there's no point setting up elaborate bombs and whatnot and blowing yourself up in your lounge as you try and put these bombs together. Just setting fire to stuff is cheap and it causes huge destruction, and you can do it in places where there's little coverage, CCTV coverage, and both the Russians and the Ukrainians appear to be paying people on the dark web or whatever to go and do this. I mean, you could imagine this might be some kind of operative working deep undercover, or it could be just someone that desperately wants some money. When money's hard to come by, it's like, well, here's $1,000. I mean, that's really cheap for an army to do. Like, well, we can try and get this drone. The drone's going to cost $150,000. We're going to set up. It's going to do this. I have munitions on board. It's going to be really difficult, but we have to get through air defense. So we're going to actually have to send 4 of these drones and hope that we can hit this train, or we can pay someone $1,000 to go and burn it. Clearly going to be the best option, that second one. Right. Anton. Moving on to distance strikes now. And last night saw another wide-ranging set of munitions flying into, well, a lot of munitions and missiles again last night. 145 drones, Shahid drones, sent into Ukraine. 79 taken out with conventional means, 54 suppressed by electronic warfare. Let's do some maths. 133 taken out of 145. So that's 12 that got through and didn't get intercepted, which is, for 145, quite a lot. And we've seen more and more of this. Some are saying that there's a connection to the intelligence sharing. Others are claiming that actually the US is still providing defensive intelligence. But there does seem to be very much a correlation with more munitions, particularly more missiles being sent, and more successful munitions finding their targets from the Russian side of things, since the Americans have declared they're not playing ball. We've got some Iskander missiles, 2 of them sent in, or KN-23, unknown whether it's Russian or North Korean, and then an Iskander K. The Iskander K was taken out, but 2 other Iskanders not. There were also claims of cluster munitions as well. Russian pouring cluster munitions on a residential neighborhood in Zaporizhia tonight, aimed purely at killing sleeping families, says Kiev. This is just genocide. So footage is coming out of cluster munitions being used by the Russians in residential areas. Tim White says drones have once again got through air defense to hit Odessa. I think Odessa is either run out of interceptors, or it has had some air defense systems taken out because they are really focusing on Odessa. They're sensing a weakness, and every night there are more strikes from the Russians. Looks like another 2 strikes about 8 to 10 kilometers north of the city itself. Another may have been near the port. Videos of a strike near Odessa despite air defense fire. So yeah, it is a real problem there. Where else do we have it? Well, they launched another massive attack, the Russians, on Ukraine, targeting residential buildings, civilian energy and gas infrastructure. It seems that they are particularly going for the energy infrastructure at the moment. Explosions were heard in Kharkiv, Ternopil, Odessa, Ivano-Frankivsk, Sumy, Poltava, Vinnytsia, Dnipropetrovsk, Chernihiv and Khmelnytsky regions. That's one that's escaped through from yesterday. Why did that's why. No, I put it in because I didn't read this all out yesterday. So this is not last night, but this is 2 nights ago. Just think that last night was added onto this. I didn't read yesterday all of what happened 2 nights ago. So bear in mind, this is 2 nights ago. According to Air Force's strategic bombers and ships carrying calibers took part in the strike. In addition, Russians hit with ballistic missiles, Cubs and Shahid drones. According to preliminary data, Russians hit Kharkiv with the ballistic missiles. Number of injured has increased to, etc., etc. Lots of things taken out there. In Ternopil, sorry, I don't mean to be dismissive. In Ternopil, gas shutdowns were reported due to a hit on an industrial facility. 2 out of 6 missiles hit the gas transportation network in the region. 4 missiles were shot down by air defense forces. Explosions also heard in Ivano-Frankivsk. Infrastructure facilities were attacked. Domestic gas pipeline was damaged in Mirhorod, district of Poltava. Unfortunately, 2 people injured, among them a child. Hospitalized in Chernihiv. One of the production facilities was damaged during the attack. In the Odessa region, there were fires in private residential houses. Critical infrastructure was also damaged. So that was 2 nights ago, to the point where, I'll bring this in now, to the point where Ukraine's DTEK gas production facilities shut down, and Ukrainian energy company DTEK's has been under an awful lot of pressure. They are a private company, and they have had their capacity absolutely banjaxed over the last couple of years. Well, okay, so that was 2 nights ago, and then we move on to Dobropilya. So Dobropilya in Donetsk region was hit last night with 2 ballistic missiles, and they'll likely be those 2 that we saw, on the list here, 2 Iskander-M or KN-23. They hit Dobropilya, which is, if I'm right, not too far from Kramatorsk. When the emergency services arrived on site, another missile was launched at them. 11 people are dead, or is it closer to Pokrovsk? Anyway, 11 people are dead. 11 died. I mean, and probably will be more. 30 more injured. 8 buildings were damaged. This is how Russians liberate Ukraine. It's terror, plain and simple. So horrific strikes last night. And some people saying, Trump did that. These deaths are on Trump's account. There is a lot of anger at the moment. I was listening to Caelan Robertson on the Bulwark. It's great to see him interviewed by Tim Miller. And I interviewed Caelan Robinson a couple of weeks ago. That's still an absolute magnificent interview. You should go and check it on my lives. Go onto my channel page on YouTube, go to the live tab, and then scroll down to Caelan Robertson. Check it out. Fascinating conversation. Now, he was just saying the amount of anger towards America at the moment, towards the Trump administration is palpable. It's just they've changed sides. Ukrainian Dobropilya, located 30 kilometers from the front line in cross direction. Footage shows Russians using cluster munitions, likely Tornado S, targeting the civilian city again. Effing hell, lie down by the wall. Video footage. I can't play the sound. I won't show it too big either because it doesn't like it, YouTube. But lots of people releasing footage of the strikes on Dobropilya, and you can see some here. Just absolute carnage. That is carnage. That is a residential area. While Trump last night said, and I'm sorry to get political, but he did say yesterday, we're going to put sanctions on Russia, and everyone's like, thank goodness, and finally he's being harsh on Russia, and almost straight away then said, we're finding it much easier to deal with Russia. Ukraine are much more difficult to negotiate with. Yeah, because they're not giving you exactly what you want, and you are giving Russia exactly what you want, and you're not giving Ukraine what they want. That's why they're easier to deal with. You are giving Russia what they want. You are helping Russia, and this is what it looks like. And then he came, and so someone questioned him and said, what do you feel about Russia doing these massive strikes? And this was actually from the strikes 2 nights ago, not last night's one, but the same question today. And he said, well, they're doing what anybody would do. He's functionally working for the Kremlin. It's absolutely despicable. Anyway, 11 killed and 30 injured. Toll of last night's double ballistic missile strike on central Dobropilya. After emergency services arrived at the scene, Russia launched another strike deliberately targeting the rescuers. A double tap. They are, this is Dobropilya, double tap bastards. Just ballistic bastards. And it is absolutely unconscionable that an ally 6 weeks ago, a country that was an ally, is now doing things to help this happen in some ways, and that's what it looks like now. Just it's horrific. These are people's homes, people's family members dead, homes destroyed. Then Kharkiv was hit with drone strikes, killing 3 civilians there. Russian drone strike on a meat processing plant in Kharkiv, killed 3 and injured 7. That happened. And so Shashank Joshi says, American intel on Russian missile attacks is still flowing to Ukraine. So you can't blame the admin for that. So he's saying, or New York Times is saying, that they're providing defensive intel still, but the intel pause does mean that Ukraine is fighting back against these strikes to a greater degree than before, with one hand tied behind its back. So they are, either Ukraine is unable to do offensive strikes and operations, and or it does affect. So some will deny this and say it is affecting their defense, and there's a very clear correlation, at least, that they've upped these attacks while the US is not sharing intel. After Trump's inauguration, Russia has intensified attacks with drones and missiles of various types, according to the Institute for the Study of War, showing that there's been a clear uptick since the inauguration. If you take a kind of average line through that, we are seeing that the Russians are really putting the pressure on, and that might be ahead of negotiations to force the Ukrainians into a worse position. Then we hear Maxar Technologies answering about the intel sharing debacle. Maxar's statement on media reports regarding access rights to Maxar imagery. I don't quite know what to make of this. So Maxar has contracts with the US government and dozens of allied and partner nations around the world to provide satellite imagery and other geospatial data. Each customer makes their own decisions on how they use and share that data. One of those contracts is GEGD, the Global Enhanced GeoInt Delivery Program, a US government program that provides access to commercial satellite imagery that has been tasked and collected by the US government. The US government has temporarily suspended Ukrainian accounts in GEGD, and that is that sentence that I can't quite work out. So is that to say it's just the American government that is no longer buying that imagery off them and therefore not providing it to the Ukrainians? Or is that to say that any Ukrainian account cannot access that? Have the US government stopped Ukraine from being able to buy that imagery off Maxar? That any account, I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. I mean, either way, it's disgusting. We take our contractual commitments very seriously. There's no change in the way we support our other customers, nor their programs or contracts. Well, I don't really care about your other. I couldn't give a rat's ass about your other customers, Maxar. And what I care about is whether Ukraine is able to access satellite imagery to stop their civilians and the soldiers dying, and to enable them to prevail in the war. Now, Trump says that Putin launching a massive strike on Ukraine is what anybody would do. I'm not going to play that to you because it just makes me so angry, but he had a bit of a mess of a chat in the White House last night where he was like, what he's saying about crypto just made no sense. In fact, he said, whatever the hell that means, or so, it was like he very clearly intimated that he didn't understand crypto, and he was just babbling on about that. And then also the stuff on Ukraine, I just think is absolutely shocking. Right, and let us go on. So what the Ukrainians did, well, we don't know. Last 3 nights, they seem to have been busy, but we're getting very little detail of battle damage assessment. What we are aware of is that Krishnefteorgant's oil refinery in the Leningrad region was attacked more than 800 kilometers from the border of Ukraine. It's a processing capacity of 20.1 million tons of oil per year, and it specializes in the production of gasoline, diesel fuel, fuel oil, and petroleum products. But one of the top 2 refineries in Russia, supposedly. That was damaged, don't know how badly. Ukrainian drones targeted one of Russia's largest oil refineries in Leningrad. Russia claims only a tank was damaged. Air defense reported shooting down 2 drones with debris causing external damage to the tank. Typically what they say all the time, but I don't know what the truth is there. And then we have this from Fighter Bomber, who is a Russian pilot, possibly, who gives actually fairly reliable data on what's going on from a Russian point of view. He said there's a battle going on in the Black Sea right now. The Crests, that's the Ukrainians attacking our gas production facility with BEKs. These are these unmanned sea vehicles. This is a 9-meter BEK that is also a carrier of several smaller BEKs or a pair of torpedoes. On board, there's also twin man pads. There's a man-portable air defense systems like Stingers, and 2 machine guns, one of which is a 6-barrel minigun. Optical guidance system with thermal imaging channel, so controlled via Starlink. This is something he's saying that there are these ongoing battles, and actually when you see data, I know Paul Sweeney, the other day I called him Sabina, Paul Sweeney, thank you, he sends me imagery of what's going on, and almost always there are little fires, the firm's data, fires going on in the Black Sea, which means that those gas rigs are the scene of fighting, that's for sure. Right, other bits and pieces. So, as we know, US shares intelligence with Ukraine for defense, but not for attacks on Russian troops, according to CNN. US continues to share some intelligence with Ukraine to assist with defensive operations, but not for attacks on Russian troops. Now, apparently, this is causing problems in Kursk. Suspension of US intelligence activities in Ukraine facilitated the Russian offensive and weakened Ukraine's position and led to many deaths of many Ukrainian soldiers, according to Time. Time magazine is reporting that the decision by the Trump administration is killing Ukrainian soldiers. Hundreds of dead inside the fallout from Trump's Ukraine intel pause. AFU in the Kursk region are having difficulty holding captured territories due to the loss of intelligence, US intelligence. It is disgusting. It's disgusting. Ukraine is considering a Kursk withdrawal amid fears of encirclement. So we are apparently seeing the one bargaining chip they really, really wanted. In the run-up to negotiations, the US has done everything they can to stop that bargaining chip from being utilized by the Ukrainians. That's the degree to which they are helping the Russians. Ukraine's forces are considering a withdrawal from Kursk, with 10,000 Ukrainian troops at risk of encirclement after Russia broke through key defensive lines and disrupted supply chains, the Telegraph has reported. It is unacceptable. Here we have Kursk region. Situation in Kursk has seriously deteriorated, says Naval reports, over the past few weeks. Russians have managed to consolidate gains and now captured the whole border area south and west of Sverdlovsk, even moving into Ukraine and capturing Novenka. So they've actually countered so much that they are in Ukraine. Here we have Deep State, New York Post, talking about this. Deep State's mapping, saying Ukraine may withdraw troops from Kursk region in the next 2 weeks, according to them. Andrew Perpetua says, for weeks, Ukrainian logistics in Kursk have suffered severe damage from drone attacks. These strikes seem to be linked to an organization within. So he's proposing that something else is going on, either as well or instead, within the Russian military, called the Rubicon Center of Advanced Unmanned Systems, established by Putin in August 24. In mid-January and early February, Rubicon began releasing videos from Kursk. Initially, they shared occasional footage from isolated vehicle strikes, but suddenly they started posting large volumes of hits, dozens of destroyed vehicles of all types, including pickup trucks, vans, QPs, Max Pros, Bradleys, and BMPs. The exact nature of Rubicon remains unclear. It's uncertain whether they operate as a single drone unit, a large coordinated force, or if they source videos from multiple existing drone groups. What is known is that Rubicon focuses on three main areas: Kursk, Pokrovsk, and Velika Novosilka. However, their most intense and damaging operations are concentrated in Kursk. Rubicon employs advanced drone tactics. They often target short sections of roads, 100 to 300 meters long, and saturate these areas with drones. Attacks are frequently carried out in groups, sometimes striking the front, back, and sides of a vehicle almost simultaneously. This approach has also been used to hit multiple vehicles in a convoy at once, compounding the damage. This is definitely a worry. They also set traps by landing drones on roads and detonating them under passing vehicles, functioning like anti-tank mines, likely using upward-facing shaped charges. Rubicon's drones are notably difficult to jam, although they primarily use standard FPV drones, particularly night vision variants. These drones appear to resist common electronic countermeasures. In practice, it makes them more effective than fiber optic drones, which are typically harder to jam but more cumbersome. The scale of the damage in Kursk is significant. Hundreds of vehicles have been destroyed, posing a major threat to Ukrainian supply lines. With the significant advancements in jamming technology to counter Rubicon's capabilities, maintaining a hold in Kursk may become unsustainable. The exact timeline of these attacks is uncertain. It is unclear whether the destruction occurred gradually or in a concentrated period. Rubicon's current activity is also ambiguous. The lack of new videos from Kursk could suggest that Ukraine has adapted to some extent, or it could simply mean Rubicon is releasing older footage for propaganda purposes. Regardless, the threat from Rubicon that they pose will not be limited to Kursk. If Ukraine retreats, these drone tactics are likely to follow, extending the problem to new areas unless countermeasures improve significantly. So that is definitely a challenge. Okay, I paused this, had to go and watch my son play football. They lost. They're now not going to win the league. And for the third match in a row, my son Finn was side down in the penalty area for the most obvious penalty you've ever seen. It's happened 3 matches in a row, and 3 matches in a row, the referee hasn't given it. So I've come back and I'm now super angry. I was angry before because of what's going on in the world. And then it looks that they're not going to win the league, and they were going to win the league. And anyway, whatever. let's finish this. And I've added a load of tabs because while I was away, I was checking out what's been going on, and oh my goodness, some interesting stuff. Okay. Kursk disaster faces Russians. So this is the analyst saying Ukrainian forces have managed to force the surrender of a large number of Russians after surrounding them. The whole of the Russian Kursk front is said to be dead because of the lack of logistical support, and what there is has to cross 18 kilometers of drone contested and electronic warfare jamming dominated by the Ukrainian systems. It's virtually a radio blackout for Russia, and they haven't been able to use glide bombs for the same reason. But they have been, I believe, in Kursk. Russia has had to give up closer air support because the Ukrainians deployed man-pads there in the Kursk area. The Russians have tried to take Malaya Loknya, a key Ukrainian defense point. Incompetence reigns supreme, however, as the Russian channels on Telegram have been decrying the appalling attacks and mistakes. One unit was waving victory flags as they blew up on Ukrainian mines, while Trump speaks in riddles nobody understands, talking garbage about Russia and Ukraine, but still thinking Ukraine doesn't want peace, despite it being made crystal clear that they do. The man in the White House sickens me. Right, I've just told you earlier in this video that Kursk is looking like they're going to pull out of Kursk, etc., etc. The latest is denial from the Ukrainian MOD. Take it with a pinch of salt, though. But Ukrainian forces hold positions in Kursk, now says Naval reports, in the Kursk region, and are not withdrawing forces. There is no encirclement, sources say. Despite worsening situation from the Russian forces advancing northwest of Sudzha, Sverdlovskovo to the border, Ukrainian troops plan to stabilize the front and plan countermeasures. War Translated says Ukrainian forces have thwarted Russia's attempt to break into Sudzha, a move that Zeb bloggers had loudly hailed as a success, claiming the city was already under Russian control. So here we have another tunnel story. The occupiers attempted to replicate the Avdiivka operation by using underground gas pipelines as tunnels, but Ukrainian troops armed with precise intelligence set an ambush and destroyed up to 80% of the invading force. And this is reported by Naval Reports as well, referring to a source here. Ukrainian paratroopers wiped out up to 80% of Russian troops trying to infiltrate via a gas pipeline, according to Officer High. Ukrainians knew the plan in advance and set up an ambush. At the right moment, the tunnel's exit was sealed, trapping the invaders. No escape, total destruction. That's a claim from Ukrainians. So there was that. So Kursk may or not be a complete disaster. The Ukrainians may or may not be pulling out. I would have thought the Ukrainians would want to hold on to it because it's a bargaining chip and they're so close to negotiations, apparently, that it'll be odd to then lose it now after all that effort. But then you don't want a sunk cost fallacy where you're piling in loads of valuable resources to hold on to something that you're basically unable to hold on to. So there is a real dilemma there for the Ukrainians. Right, Christopher Miller now reports that 4 large satellite operators, he's from the Financial Times, Luxembourg's SES, Spain's Hisdesat, Visasat, owner of UK's Inmarsat, and France's Eutelsat, or OneWeb, which is, I think, Franco-British concern, have all told the Financial Times that they're in talks with governments and EU institutions about how to provide backup connectivity to Ukraine. So as the US looks like they're going to be stepping back from providing intelligence, there are there are European providers that are happy to step in and try and provide information and intelligence and satellite imagery to Ukraine. Republican senators have been urging Trump to reconsider the Ukraine aid pause. There have been some rumors that the military aid has been released, that it is flowing again. I've not seen that anywhere. I've just heard it in a couple of videos from people. I think General Breedlove might have been someone that mentioned it yesterday. But yeah, take that with a pinch of salt. Military experts have warned that Ukraine's forces could begin to falter within 4 to 6 months without new American aid. So to be honest, it's not so much about releasing the aid that's coming through, because that has been getting less and less anyway, because they're coming to the end of the PDA and refurbished stuff that's being sent out. What they need is new aid packages, and the Trump administration is highly unlikely to give that. Now, we're going to get on to some incredible news. First of all, I was going to do this in my next video, but do it now to join it up. Daily Telegraph understands that the president is considering redeploying troops from Germany to Hungary. So the US are apparently thinking about moving NATO troops or American troops from Germany, where they have bases and they historically have had this close relationship. They're going to move them to Hungary, where, of course, Viktor Orban, big fan of the American conservative movement, Heritage Foundation, which is which has written Project 2025, is heavily involved in lobbying, involved in finances coming through the Hungarian government to them through the Bettany Foundation and the Danube Institute. They get some funding from them, and they've also got connections with CPAC in Hungary. And the Heritage Foundation wrote Project 2025, which is what the blueprint of the Trump administration is. So the Heritage Foundation's connection to Hungary and the Orban connection to Mar-a-Lago and the Trump administration is out there. And there is no surprise to me that they're going to try and do something like this, move American troops from Germany to Hungary, which is again supporting the Ruski Mir, really, the Russian world. Then add to this. So now we're hearing that the US has informed allies that it will halt participation in planning upcoming military exercises in Europe. This is starting to see the functional pulling out of NATO. Now, I know some people go, oh, stop talking about how the US can't pull out of NATO, because Marco Rubio, of all people, put a bill in place that you had to have a supermajority in Congress in order to allow Trump to do that. He can't do it unilaterally, and that was because they previously worried about him doing that unilaterally. Well, what he can do, though, is render NATO functionally, render it without the US. That he can functionally pull the US out of NATO without doing it formally. And this is how you do it. So they're not going to participate in European military training exercises. Shift follows US efforts to reduce military spending in Europe, prioritizing the Indo-Pacific region instead. NATO countries may now have to plan exercises without significant US involvement. The analyst says it's starting. I'd heard this was happening, but was sworn to keep quiet. The US will take part in those already planned, but no new exercises will be scheduled with NATO after the current ones end in mid-2025. This has two drivers. The first being budget constraints. The House still hasn't passed the budget, and the DoD is only able to spend money at the same pace as 23 and 24, and is already 17 billion in the red. There's been no 2024-25 budget passed, and they haven't even started on 25 to 26, which they should have by now. The second is political. This is stop the Russians, and also a commencement of I don't know whether there's some missing words here. Commencements of forced drawdown in time for disengagement. We knew it would come, and it's starting. As of yet, there's no money to make the drawdown happen, but it will come. It's going to be a long road. So we're starting to see, I think, the US pull back from Europe, the US pull out of NATO, concentrate on the Indo-Pacific as an excuse to kind of pull out of NATO. And Europe's going to obviously have to step up. But I think we're seeing a real change in the geopolitical landscape around the world, and certainly the security infrastructure that we've come to associate as being a coordinated cooperation between Europe and the US and other nations called Canada. Of course, Canada, Australia, Japan, etc., etc. Okay. Now, in that context, 41% of Danes now see the US as a threat to Denmark. Of course, you got the Greenland issue. According to one poll, 92% believe that Denmark should prioritize Europe over the US when it comes to security. And then only 16% of Germans say that we can trust the USA. Let that sink in, says Janis Kluger. Wow. So you are seeing a massive change, a sea change in political opinion in Europe and in Ukraine. There are lots of reports about Ukrainians being disconsolate, enraged actually about what the US has done. The Trump administration has done with regard to Ukraine. So there's a lot going on at the moment, and none of it I think is sensible at all. And all of it is to the benefit of Vladimir Putin, whether that's intentional or not. It doesn't really matter. It's all to the benefit of Putin. I'm going to end with more, I don't know, and now for something completely different. In Bashkortostan, a physics teacher was watching porn right in the classroom. So this is in Russia. But the teacher wanted to enjoy a racy video discreetly, but got so carried away that he forgot to disconnect it from the projector. And as a result, the whole class watched the spicy video that the physics teacher was watching. The school authorities suspended the man from classes and started an inspection. Absolutely hilarious there. Quality teaching going on there in Russia. That's what the teacher should be doing, of course, in the middle of a physics lesson. I'll leave that one with you. Take care, guys. Speak to you soon.